Hello and welcome to Research, Rank, and Repeat. I am one of your hosts, Alyssa.
I'm Hannah.
Our other host.
Yes.
You could introduce yourself as a host if you want to.
Well,
You're not a
sometimes
guest.
I don't consider myself a host.
Okay.
But
okay. Well, great. But
Yeah.
today, we're back again, going back to Korra.
all right, so moving on to book 2.
We're here
We're
at
here.
book 2, and oh boy,
Oh boys, right?
I gotta tell you, when we were talking about doing this and watching it together, I was dreading getting to book 2.
I understand why.
We'll get into more as we go on, but there are a lot of good highs, but there are also a lot of lows.
Let's just start out. I got a little description. So it's book 2, Spirits. With the spirit and human worlds colliding, Team Avatar embark on a journey diving deep into the mythology of the mystical spirit world, encountering creatures like nothing they've ever seen before, and discovering the truth about the very first Avatar. I should say this is from Amazon. It's a description we got from there. The first book we got from Wikipedia. Most
Yes.
trusted source on the
A
web.
very, very trusted source. And you know where I got some information about book 2 from? Wikipedia.
There we go.
So, I want to talk about production. So, as we discussed earlier, book 1 used to air Saturdays at about 11 to 11:30. I couldn't find a concrete time when I was looking it up, but a good time for adults to watch, good time for kids to watch, a good time slot. Book 2, they went, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. You know what time adults love to watch cartoons at? Friday nights at like 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, because no one's doing anything on a Friday night.
Yep, and I remember because I was in college when this came out, and I wouldn't watch it on Fridays because I'm doing stuff on Fridays. And may have been a cause of that, but basically what happens is the ratings of the show, season 1, 3.8 million, season 2, it drops to 2.6 million.
Right.
And there's a couple things that could have caused that. It could have been because the big delay between book 1 and book 2, could be because of the new time slot, could be because they were trying to push their online video player, which by the way was terrible at the time. The buffering was awful. And so let's talk about something else. If you may have noticed, book 2 has some different animation to start.
It does.
And basically what happened is, since this initially was just supposed to be a miniseries, the studio that did book 1 declined to do book 2. They were working on a different show. So that studio being Studio Mir that did book 1. So Nickelodeon went to Studio Perot. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Okay.
And so they worked on book 2 from the beginning. But then Studio Mir came back to do part of the seasons, mainly for their own reputation.
I mean, they really came back and saved the season for me.
Oh, so there is some rough animation in the beginning of this book.
Can I just say, like, one of the first things I wrote down about the season was this animation just looked horrible. And the fighting sequences did not look good. The people's eyes looked horrible.
The facial animation has
Yeah.
really stood out to me. There's a scene where Korra is riding on Naga, and I sent you a picture of that from book 1, like the first or second episode when she's riding on Naga, and like the comparison, it looks so different.
It's so much worse.
And so Studio Perot would go on to do episodes 1 through 6, and then episode 9. Studio Mir came in and did 7 and 8, and then 10 through 14.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that because I think the real turning point for me was the 2-parter episode, the beginnings.
Beginnings 1 and 2.
The first, 2 seconds, I was like, the animation looks so much better than it looks all season.
Yeah, so let's go back before we get to that, because I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot. Let's talk about the first segment of book 2. One of the things I asked you is, what did you want to see from a book 2? And you wanted to explore. You wanted to go back and, see places we've already been. You wanted to get out of Republic City, and we go to the South Pole.
Right.
We're hanging out in the South Pole. We're learning about Korra's family. We get to meet the villain Unalaq, who is lackluster to say the least.
I think To me, one of the most disappointing things was I loved Amon as a villain, and I thought he was such a compelling villain. He had such a good backstory. And with Unalaq, I just was like, I kept waiting for a backstory. I kept waiting for a reason to want to root for him, and I never found that.
Yeah, I don't think he was ever interesting.
No.
The only thing he had going for him was like the spiritual energy, like teaching her how to spirit bend water, like the mentorship kind of role.
But that was like one episode, maybe two. And then
Right.
after that I was like, I don't even really care about him. Which you want to care about the villain.
Right. And then we meet Desna and Eska, and they are some interesting twins. I love Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah.
I mean, who else are you going to get to play a deadpan crazy girl? Did I say deadpan?
Yeah.
God damn it. Deadpan crazy girl.
Yeah, and she was in Monsters University.
She was.
But she has one of those voices where as soon as you hear it, I was like, that's Aubrey Plaza. You just know.
Instantaneously. And speaking of book 2 characters that we get introduced to, we get to meet Varric.
Varric, to me, was the biggest surprise this whole season. And I'll say this. I think for me, Varric saved the first half of season 2. To me, there was not a lot of redeeming qualities about that. But his character and the humor and everything he brought to it was my favorite part of the first half of season 2.
I completely agree. Everything Varric does is great. He's so eccentric and crazy, but he's also very smart, very cunning. He's very compelling.
He, to me, was a more compelling villain. Well, not really a villain. He's like a...
I mean, he kidnapped the president.
He is
That's,
kind of a villain.
You know, that's kind of villainish.
But somehow he, even not being the main villain, managed to be a lot more compelling.
yeah, the first part is just like, it makes you want to hate all of the characters.
Right.
Korra feels like she's regressed because she's just being like cocky and fighting with Tenzin. It's like, I don't need you anymore. Like, and I'm like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. And first 4 or 5 episodes, I had a really hard time getting through.
We talked about this. Episode 5, I think, is the worst episode in the book, for sure.
I think a lot of the things that season 1 did so well, it felt like they just completely forgot about in season 2. Lim and Asami were barely in it.
They got almost nothing to work with.
And I just wasn't interested in anyone's story.
I really did not care about the civil war between the North and the South. Just nothing about that was interesting or compelling. And, like, the character interactions felt off. Like, I didn't like a lot of the characters this season. Somehow, we talked about this a little bit, but somehow in the middle of the show, right before beginnings, Mako was my favorite character.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is this happening? How is he the most competent character and the only one who's like, this is what's happening? Lynn's like, get out of here, you're a beat cop. The stupid detectives. I hated those two. They sucked.
Can we just talk about this? Because it's one thing that I hate when a show does is they bring a character on for the purpose of like a romantic storyline, being Asami. And then once that romance has ended, they forget how to write the character. They don't know how to give them their own solo like storyline.
Yeah.
And I felt like Asami really got that this season. Even in the finale, she just like dipped out.
Definitely. Like, her and Bolin worked.
Right.
Like, so that some of that stuff worked. Her and Bolin together. I bought their friendship.
Yeah.
I bought that they weren't, it wasn't romantic. It was just a pure friendship. But also, once she's, like, back with Mako, and then there's a love triangle again, and then once that's kind of done, yeah, she's just gone.
Right.
She's like, take my dad, get out of here, and then you just don't see her again.
I think the other thing I enjoyed, well, at times I enjoyed it, at times it just felt like it was, like, plot filler.
Yeah.
Was seeing the 3 siblings.
Yes. I honestly like that they make that Aang's not a perfect father. I like that he was so, like, hell-bent on making sure the culture's preserved, teaching Tenzin, making sure Tenzin has all the information that, he neglected his other kids.
Yeah.
He spent so much time with his Airbender son. And because of that, Tenzin feels such a weight on his shoulders.
Right.
That I liked that dynamic, that they're not perfect. That the characters we had from last season aren't perfect.
Those, like, 2 things I just mentioned were really the only redeeming qualities the first half of the season, or first 3 quarters of the season.
That scene where Boomy's talking to Aang's statue, and he's like, I hope he made you proud. Like,
Yeah.
I tried to do my best. I'm like, oh, That hurts. I can feel it. But I agree. There's just not a lot to like. But then we make a complete 180 and we go into the past and we meet the first Avatar, and it's just night and day.
Beginnings. Part 1 and 2.
Amazing.
To me, that was when this season turned for me.
100%.
I love the animation style. I loved that kind of like, how would you even describe it?
It's kind of like storybook. I got a lot of like Studio Ghibli vibes from that, especially with like the Spirit Oasis. Felt really like Spirited Away, and just kind of more like watercolor paint, like painted background. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but
it was such a good story, and it was 2 parts. It was done so well over those 2 parts, and it was interesting to me that a character I had never met before could be that intriguing, and also it just happened to be that like my favorite episode to that point didn't really include any of the original characters minus Korra for like 30 seconds or a minute total, but it just, that story was done so well.
It might be spoilers for my favorite episode of this book, but the beginnings part 1 and 2 is, at this point in the story, is my favorite episode.
I would agree.
Episodes, if you want to count it as, more than one. It's so interesting that book 2 as a whole just feels so disconnected and segmented, and like it doesn't flow well, and that they're able to tell this concise, short form but like amazing story, just in 2 episodes, and it makes you care so much about the characters. You care about Rava, you care about Vatu, you learn so much history, like you get to go back and see like, okay, how did bending come about, how did people like learn to bend, how did the Avatar become the Avatar. It's so strange that in such a, I think personally, a poorly told season, that you just get this amazing short form story.
I got to the point where the season where I was just felt like I was trying to get through episodes, and I don't want to have to watch a show and be like, oh, just have to get through these next couple episodes. And that was the first time that season or this book, I keep calling it season.
It's all good.
It was the first time though where I didn't want to get through it. I wanted it to keep going. I would have watched like a 3-hour movie of that because it was so intriguing. Brought up a lot of like moral, like man versus spirit, which kind of continue on later in the season. But it just was done so well in so many aspects.
And I love that we see Juan transform too, because at the beginning he's basically Aladdin. He's a street rat, stealing food, running away from authorities.
He's riffraff.
Street rat.
I
Scoundrel. Take that.
Buy that.
One jump. Okay, we're done with the Aladdin references. I don't remember what I was talking about. Oh, okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about. I loved everything with those 2 episodes. And I think that's what book 2's biggest strength is its connection to the past. And in connection to Avatar, connection to, the Avatar Juan and the past. We got to see Wan Shitan's library. We got to see Admiral Zhao. There's a lot of callbacks. You learn more about Aang.
Iroh.
We get to see Iroh, which I was so excited for that moment because I know how much you love Iroh, and I'd been waiting for it, and
it caught me off guard, and I got emotional because I love him. And after that episode, after Beginnings, it really felt like a celebration of what Avatar was.
I agree.
And all the good qualities about Avatar, even bringing back some of the characters. I like that they went back to the roots.
I agree.
Because I think the first half of season, or book 2, was just going way off the rails. It was just too far from even book 1 of Korra. And I think going back to going back to your roots is always a good thing for a show to do. And I'm glad that they finally did that.
And you kind of get a little bit of that in that conversation that Tenzin has with Aang, or the illusion of Aang, where he's like, you are not me and you should not be me.
Right.
Like, you are your own person. And that kind of is the same thing for Korra versus Avatar. Like, Korra is not Avatar: The Last Airbender. But I do think that the relation to the past and using the past to explain new things and to expand on things is a great idea.
Yeah. No, I agree. A lot of my last notes I have are just about the, like, final 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah. The finale makes no sense.
No, it's insane.
There are so many things that I don't understand. I get that it's during harmonic conversion, so there's a lot of weird spirit energy, so Korra can, harness her cosmic spiritual energy and project herself and fight like a demon man the size of a skyscraper, And then just Jinora just appears and throws Rava into Vatu for some reason. I don't know where she found her, but...
I knew there were kind of signs of it all season. They kept showing her seeing spirits and everything, but it's just so confusing.
Yeah.
I think... I'm just going to start with the good, because I like to kind of point out the good things I liked. The music.
Oh, the music. I was thinking about my favorite scene. Every single scene, part of it was because of the music that played during it.
I got chill. I kept telling you, like, chills. I got chills, and I think one of the things that the show does so well, even earlier on in the season when it was struggling, is the music was always, like, that consistent factor.
Right.
That made me really enjoy the show in the first place. And then also, I kind of liked how at the end it kind of pointed to where the show might go. Korra's no longer bonded with the past avatars.
Right, she has lost her connection to the past avatars.
Right. And so we don't know, you know, because
I was going to say, but at this point in the show, we don't know what the implications of that are.
You don't know if she'll ever get that back, or if now it's like she has to figure out everything within herself and with other people and not having that bond from the past.
Right.
Also, they brought up the question if human and spirit should be living together. And in the end, ultimately, Korra decides that she shouldn't be the bridge between the spirit world and the human world, which I thought was interesting. And humans and spirits living together.
Yes.
So that's another thing. I don't know if that will continue on, and if there'll be issues from that, or how that kind of will go carrying on in the next couple books.
Yeah, there are some large-scale changes and questions that this book leaves you with.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I know we talked about that book 1 was written independently and then book 2 was ordered. So some point during the production of book 2, I don't know if it was post-writing or near the end of writing, Nickelodeon renewed Korra for books 3 and 4.
Okay.
So at some point, they were working on book 2 post-production, book 3, and book 4 pre-production. So they were working on a ton of stuff at the same time. So I think there might have still been some disconnect between, book 2 independently to leading to book 3. But I'll just let you know going forward, book 3 and 4 were written together. I know book 1 left a lot of, it felt very final, and then I don't really feel like they used things from book 1 and book 2. There was no talk about the equalists. The only thing we got is that there's now a president instead of a council. That whole ideology and struggle within Republic City just kind of disappeared.
Because I said I wondered at the end if that kind of people being afraid of people with powers and everything, that if that would continue on in book 2, and it didn't really have any impact or an effect.
Nope.
Which I guess is okay, but it did just feel really like 2 different shows.
I agree.
Between book 1 and 2.
I think the hardest thing is Korra just feels like she regresses.
Right.
It's so hard going from where we ended, book 1, she was broken. She's distraught over losing her bending, and then, we cut forward 6 months, so enough time has passed, but it's that she's just right back to where she started from.
Right. So favorite episode, mine was Beginnings Part 1 and 2.
I put Beginnings Part 1 and 2, and I didn't know if we could only do one episode, but I assumed that could technically count as
I just counted it as one.
Yeah. We talked about it a lot, but it is by far the best part of season 2.
Agreed. My favorite quote, I gotta go with my Iroh.
Of course.
Dropping some knowledge on everyone. He says, "You will find that if you look for the light, you can often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will oh my god. That is all you will ever see."
You did it.
There we go.
Wait,
I made it.
Golf clap. Golf clap.
Thank you. Good answer.
Good answer.
But yeah, Iroh to me, every scene he was in, I just felt so much warmth. And I missed
agree.
him. I missed him so much.
It was like we got all the wisdom we needed in 5 minutes for the whole season or the whole book. I was like, we got it. This is all I need. I also went with an Ira quote because how could I not? My quote I chose, though, is sometimes the best way to solve your own problems is to help somebody else.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great life lesson because, I mean, that's true for me.
No, it is.
I do a lot of that myself.
Yeah, I agree.
And I wanted to give a special shout out to, in Beginnings, there's the line where Rava just says, "We are bonded forever." And just the way she delivers that line, I just like chills.
Yeah.
So I just want to give a special shout out to that one.
So my favorite scene, it had to do with the music.
My favorite
Integrated
scene
into it.
also had to do with the music as well.
It was I believe it was in the last episode when Vatu's like cutting off the ties with all the avatars. It's the scene itself and then just the music that's playing, that combination of it, it's done so well.
I had a hard time picking a favorite scene, and I will say all of my scenes had to do with the music, the inclusion of the music. I thought about the scene with Tenzin and Aang, and there's that really low, like, Avatar theme playing, like, Aang's theme in the background, and that, like, quiet moment I really liked. I liked the moment where Juan and Rava fuse, and the Avatar theme builds. I kind of have a tie between two. I can't pick.
Okay.
I'll be honest, I was trying to pick between two of them and I couldn't do it. So one of them is, it's all about the music. When Korra accesses the cosmic power and she's on that bridge, you know, that Aang was on when he was learning to master the Avatar state, and that theme kicks in, and I was going to look up what that theme's called and I completely forgot to do that, but it is the best score. It's the best part of the score of book 2 is when she accesses her inner spirit and channels that and like becomes a giant blue spirit. That whole scene, I loved it. And
that was, sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're
that
fine.
was actually my second choice for favorite scene.
And my second one, I couldn't pick between them. It's kind of an odd choice, I think, but there's a montage during Beginnings where Avatar, Juan, and Rava are discussing things while they're going to the lion turtles, and just that montage of him learning the elements and them discussing, like, you know, there cannot be light, like, just like there's dark, there has to be light and dark together, and talking about,
she says one could not survive
without the other. Yeah, so they're talking about things, and there's that, it's just like the music's great, and just that montage, I just really liked that montage and the discussion. I feel like you got kind of to build and learn more, but it was also moving and flowing, and I just really liked that moment.
My favorite fight, also from Beginnings.
Yeah, same.
It's Juan versus Vatu.
Vatu. I put the same thing.
When he like encloses him with all the elements, just it's visually was so appealing. The music was done so well, and I just sat in silence and watched it. I didn't want it to end.
Also, the art style really lends to the bending, because when he's airbending, he's on like a cloud, and we don't see that, you know, in normal Avatar universe. Like the sharp edges of like using water and fire, and just that looks so cool.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so top 3 characters.
Okay.
Number 1, I got to give it to Varric.
I put Varric as my number 1 as well.
He saved the first half of the season for me. To me, he was the most consistent character that I was like always excited to see him in a scene. His humor was really good, and he was really compelling. He had a really good storyline. I
love his storyline in book 2. And he gets the best comedic moment when Bolin's like, "Is this boat fast enough to outrun my crazy ex-waterbending girlfriend?" And he's like, "Why'd you think I built this boat?" And just speed off. And I'm like, oh my god, Varric. I love it.
Number 2, I went with Korra.
I went with Tenzin for my number 2.
Season 1, I didn't have her in my top 3.
I didn't either.
I had a hard time with her character in season 1. I think part of the reason it was so hard for me is because she was the complete opposite of Aang. I don't know if I was expecting that, but for me this season, the first half, I was still not a fan of her. I think she grew a lot going from like after the Beginnings episode onward, and I'm hopeful that going into book 3 and 4 that she'll continue like on an upward path, and that I'll continue to like her. But I just thought she had good development this season.
I did not put her on my top 3 list. I think my problem with her in book 2 is I don't have a problem with her, like, me disliking her, because some characters you love to hate, you know, like Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
Right.
He's an amazing character that's terrible. I hate him with all the passion that I have.
Yeah.
But, like, I love him. He's a great character.
Right.
I think that she just didn't get a good journey to get to the point where she learned. I feel like it was just so heavy-handed.
For me, she did turn around at the end. I don't think if she had had the last couple episodes, I probably wouldn't put her on my list. But you said Tenzin.
Let me talk about Tenzin. I really like Tenzin this book because I feel like he gets a lot of personal growth. Because we watch him in the beginning, we watch him interacting with his family and having to come to terms that, you know, his father maybe wasn't the best parent. His siblings and him didn't have the same relationship with their dad, you know, that he did. And then he also has to come to terms that he can't guide Korra spiritually. You know, his daughter is the one who has to take her into the spirit world, and watching him be frustrated and having to come to terms with that, that he's like, this is what I've, you know, been training my whole life for, and I can't be this for you.
Yeah, no, he did. He definitely did. And now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, maybe he was one of my favorite characters this book. But going from book 1 him to book 2, I just feel like he didn't have as much screen time.
I agree. He didn't have as much screen time.
Or the first half, I wasn't crazy about his character the first half. I think he definitely, the last couple episodes, did get a lot of growth. He was my, like, 4th for this season. To everyone's surprise, myself the biggest, somehow Macho / Mako made it on my list of top 3 characters.
Top 3? And we talked about this. I really liked Mako in book 2.
I think the reason that I liked him so much was because the beginning of the season, the first half, he was one of the only characters who's actually getting stuff done.
He was a competent character.
Yeah. No one would listen to him. They thought he was, like, insane. And he was right the whole time.
And he was trying to be supportive to Korra, and she didn't want to have any of it.
The reason I would also kick him off my list is because he just treats Asami like trash.
Yeah, I understand why. Like, for instance, lying to Korra, not telling them about the breakup because she forgot about it. You know, not really giving Asami the proper closure that she deserved, because she, as we always say, Asami deserves better.
Her outfits.
Oh my god. So, special shout out, Asami's not on my list because she just didn't get enough to do this season, but Asami's outfits are always on point. Her jackets, fantastic. Her formal wear, amazing.
Can I change my top 3 to just Asami's outfits?
Just Asami's outfits. I'll allow it. Accepted.
Yeah, I wanted to put her on my list, but I couldn't justify it because she got no screen time. But yeah, so that's why I put him on my last on my list, because I felt like he was the only one this season consistently who was actually like, this is what's happening, this is what we need to do, and everyone else was just like running in circles. I don't even know.
My third one, and maybe it's cheating, but I put Juan. I put Avatar 1.
Oh. See, I wanted to do that, but I was like, he was only in 2 episodes, but he did, maybe was my favorite character this whole season.
That's why I put him third, because I was like, I can't justify him having him first or second because of the, you know, he's only in 2 episodes, but just the lasting impact his story had on me over time in general, and also just in rewatch, just, he's such a compelling character. He's so likable. Because he makes mistakes, but he learns from his mistakes, and I like everything they did with his character.
Yeah. No, I agree. Also, I just realized this was the first book that didn't have one of the elements in the title.
And that's what we're going to talk about. So I asked you after book 1 what you thought the title of book 2 would be, since we had covered all 4 elements. And I think you didn't have a guess.
Yeah, I didn't know.
And so we ended up getting spirits. Yeah. So now knowing what we know about how book 2 ended and the setup into book 3, do you have any guesses about what book 3 would be called?
I hope it's called Zuko's Back.
I will tell you, all of the titles going forward, there are still continued one word. It's all one word titles. If you had to think of a word to describe what you think book 3 would be.
The only words in my head right now are food.
It's not food.
Changes.
Okay.
Changes.
Changes? Okay.
I don't think that's right, but what are you gonna do? I hate myself.
Well, you'll find out.
I think every single episode we've ever recorded, I've said I've hated myself at least once.
Probably accurate. You know, you will find out. So now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is, What do you think is going to happen in book 3? Book 1, we had like kind of like a finality
Right.
to it. There wasn't any form of setup for the next book. So it was kind of all in the open, you know, like it was very just open-ended what I wanted to ask you. But now we have Korra. She doesn't have her connection to the past avatars. She has Rava now.
Right.
She has the connection with Rava, but the spirit portals are now open. And we had this harmonic convergence where Vatu and Unalaq kind of attacked Republic City and like caused some issues. Like there was all those weird vines, you know, growing out of the water. So do you have any ideas or like character things you'd want to see, like character interactions or character, you know, storylines, things that you want to see?
I think, here's what I want. I want Asami to get her own storyline that doesn't have to revolve around like a romantic or like other characters.
Okay.
Because I feel like book 1, she was such a compelling character. And I feel like if they could find a way to write her, they could make her compelling again. But I want a compelling villain again. I miss that this book. Amon was to me like a really compelling villain until the end. It kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
Fizzled out.
But I think of like Bane from Batman or Dark Knight. Like I just want someone who's got a lot of meat to them. Not
Get some meat on those bones.
Man meat. Oh God.
Oh God.
Hope to God.
No,
Mom,
Hannah, you heard it here, everyone. Hannah wants man meat.
I hope to God Mom never watches this or listens to this. God.
She probably will.
Probably not.
She'll clutch her pearls. No, she wouldn't.
I'm not telling her.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna tell her about it. But yeah, I just want a character that isn't so one note.
Yeah.
I want to care about them. With Amon, I almost at times felt like sympathetic. I felt sympathy, and I want a character like that I care about.
So I can't hold on to it anymore. You know how I asked you to title book 3 as you called it Changes?
Is that the title?
The book 3's title is Change. And I can't hold on to it anymore. I can't.
I kid you not, like I did not know that.
I know you don't know that. I just, you said Changes and I went, God damn it, are you kidding me?
Because I was thinking about Shrek, and then I thought of and then I was like, I'll just go Changes.
Book 3 is called Change.
The show could use some change.
It could use some change.
But yeah, let's jump into book 3.
So, I want to just talk a little bit about some things that from the production side, the airing side of things that you might not be aware of as you were not watching it live. So, last I told you is that books 3 and 4 were worked on consecutively. So, unlike books 1 and book 2 and even like the very start of book 3, they knew they were making 2 more books. They were written at the same time. Mm-hmm. So book 3 picks up where book 2 left off. But on the production side, we had some problems. To put it as I wrote in my notes, I just wrote the word terrible.
Okay.
It's just to start. So they basically gave no notice when book 3 was airing. They dropped the trailer. I remember this. They just dropped the trailer out of nowhere, and it was going to be airing like in the same month. And it started airing in June of 2014, and they aired it in an order that didn't make sense. So they aired the first 3 episodes together.
Like an hour and a half segment?
Yes.
Oh.
They aired episodes 1 through 3 all at once together. And then they aired things out of order, so it didn't really make, like, the arcs didn't make sense.
Right.
Because you got a gap between, the way they wanted it to be aired was episodes 1 and 2 together. And then episode 3 and maybe 4 or 3 separate, and then 4 and 5, and it just aired all out of order. I couldn't find anything online. I didn't look too deep. I couldn't remember what time slot this appeared in. Mm-hmm. I don't think it aired at 8 p.m. on Friday nights anymore. I just don't think it was a good time slot. But here's where things get interesting. Once we get to episode 8, that airs, and then Nickelodeon removes Korra from television.
Like, took it off completely?
They took it off from airing on television. They moved it exclusively online, on their website, and digital download for the remainder of the season.
Huh.
And they would continue to air it online through the end of the show.
Yeah, because wasn't book 4 all online?
Completely online.
Because I remember that being a thing, that I'd heard about that.
So I guess there were some issues with episodes being leaked. There were episodes that were leaking before they premiered. I remember scenes being leaked, full episodes are being leaked, and there's also dwindling ratings. Not to the fault of the show, just bad time slots and, the fact that they literally had no warning that, the book was airing.
Right.
And the video player on Nick's website was total ass.
Yeah.
It sucked. It was so bad. The buffer was terrible. It was such a bad experience. I don't understand how they thought that was a good way to air things. Now, let's talk about the approval rating. Book 3 of Korra has a 100% fresh approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And it reviewed very well. Mm-hmm. So clearly, even though Nick clearly didn't have faith in it, it did really well in the ratings and reviews. The other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting is the first episode that aired exclusively online was the episode where the Earth Queen dies. And some people were like, I wonder if this was on purpose because they didn't think they could air that on television.
Huh. No, that's actually a good point. Because I was a little bit surprised when I saw that.
It was shocking.
Yeah.
To say the least. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on what happened on the production side of things, and there will be even more to talk about once we get to book 4. But I just wanted to cover what had happened in between books 2 and 4.
Okay. So for book 3, Change, which I did guess that name right.
I don't understand how you got it right.
The song just came into my head, and I was like, sure, I'll go with that.
I'll ask you about 4, and hopefully you will not come up with the correct answer.
We'll see.
Yeah.
So a little summary. Still dealing with the aftermath of harmonic convergence. Team Avatar must work together when a new group of villains comes into play and airbenders suddenly appear out of nowhere. So, like, within 5 minutes into this episode, I was like, this is already so much better than book 2.
Literally and figuratively is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. Oh, I wrote that because the first episode was called A Breath of Fresh Air.
Now, I know I asked you what you thought was going to happen, but did you ever foresee just airbending showing up in random people? Like,
no, I didn't. I never thought that just random people would be getting airbending. I said that was one of the things that when I saw they were doing that, I was like, that's such a genius thing to do.
I will say one of the things that I really respect about book 3 is that the writing is very smart.
Mm-hmm.
They are able to use strengths previously from books 1 and 2 and make it really work in book 3.
Yeah, and I immediately loved the villain introductions.
Oh my god.
I love the idea of having a group of villains.
Yes.
And the way they introduce each villain, that setup was so good.
I don't know if you noticed in your rewatch, the villains have a theme, the Red Lotus theme.
Mm-hmm.
A fantastic musical track, by the way. One of the best in the shows. But I wondered if you noticed when they're breaking the members of the Red Lotus out of prison, the music changes. Because it adds instruments as each new member is added. And I was wondering if you had noticed that in your rewatch.
The first time I didn't, because I was just, I think, so focused on paying attention to what was happening. I did notice it the second time I was watching through. Another thing I noticed that I didn't even pick up on the first time was when Zahir's in prison, he literally does this whole thing about, like, untethering himself from the earth. Mm-hmm. Like, that line comes up, and once I'd finished the third book, and when I was rewatching that first episode, I was like, he literally lays out what's going to happen in that first episode.
He does.
Which I love, that kind of foreshadowing. I think for me it was just, the reason I found it so much better was because just the writing was so good. Characters that I necessarily didn't like became more likable for me.
Korra is so likable at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
She immediately starts off, her talk with the guy on the bridge, I love that with her because she comes across as so genuine and so relatable, and you can see how much she's learned.
Yeah, and even, I can't think of his name, but he's Tenzin's son.
Oh, Milo.
for the first like 2 books, he was very just like annoying to me.
Oh, I hated Milo.
But he actually got more likable this book.
There's this scene where Tenzin is just looking at Aang's statue, and he's like, I wish your grandfather could be here to see this, because he's like, look at it, Dad, like, look at all these airbenders, like, we're gonna refill the temples. And it's like he starts like tearing up, and his kids are all, oh my God, it gets, you literally, I'm tearing up right now. But I love that scene so much, because it's so great to see Tenzin like so full of hope and like carrying on Aang's legacy, because he was the last airbender. You know,
I think like I love that the whole season you have this interesting, I guess, new dynamic with Tenzin, where he so desperately wants to have that Air Nation again.
Yes.
And he almost acts out of character at time.
He does.
Because he just is so desperate for it.
He almost acts.
He's such an ass.
Kiss ass. He's a kiss ass. He almost acts childish at times. He's frustrated. He's with the new airbending recruits. He's cranky. It's interesting to see that, but I completely understand why, because it's so overwhelming. It must be so overwhelming for him.
Yeah, and I think he gets frustrated because he doesn't feel like anyone cares as much as he does about wanting to restore that. And there's a lot of scenes where he's happy because you can tell he's kind of getting what he wants. Or the scene where the air temple gets destroyed at the end.
Oh my God.
And he's just looking back, like basically seeing it
heartbreaking
destruction. But I think one of the things I loved about this season was there was so much good conflict.
There was so much good conflict, and it wasn't just one conflict. There were several different conflicts that worked really well together.
Yeah.
Because you've got,
I mean, even Korra being kicked out of Republic City at the beginning.
right.
You also have the one conflict I really loved this season was Korra and Lin.
Yes.
And it was really interesting because...
Or Lin with her sister.
Yeah, Lin and Sue. But with Korra and Lin, the thing I loved was... I can't remember what episode it was, but basically Lin is trying so hard to protect Korra. And I understand her side, but there was an episode where Korra basically says... You know, I'm the Avatar, this is my job.
Right.
And I'm like, I think I agree with Korra on that front.
She's matured a lot.
She's doing what she's supposed to be doing, and I understand Lynn's trying to protect her and wants to keep her safe, but I just loved all the conflict this season.
There was a lot of, like, very mature discussions and intertwined plots that, like, really worked well together, because my main problem with book 2 is everything felt so... like segmented. I don't know, just like the different storylines didn't really work in book 2. But book 3, it's so consistent throughout the entire show. But yeah, every episode builds and adds, and the tension is good, and it has good payoff. Because book 1, that was my real problem, is that book 1 did tension and like suspense building so well, but the payoff was not worth it. But book 3, I think, from start to finish, had a nice, great story.
Yeah. I think my other favorite thing was the characters who I felt got sidetracked last season, specifically like Lin, Asami, Bolin. Like, they all kind of got their moments this season. You got more backstory on her with Sue and with Toph. We kind of talked about this, but it's interesting to see how Aang and Toph are like flawed characters as adults.
I think that's really interesting, yeah.
Because you think of them as like these, I mean, they were kids when we saw them, but it's cool to see that they didn't grow up these like perfect people. But I love that Asami actually got to do something this season.
Asami got to do stuff.
And she wasn't just, I felt like last season she was either just there for like a romantic plot or she was just in the background.
I think Asami, them deciding to create this closer bond between Asami and Korra was a great decision, because previously I know they tried to like have Asami be with Bolin in book 2, not like romantically, but just be like they were in a lot of the same scenes together.
Mako?
And no, Asami and Bolin. Mako also had scenes together, but I felt like they tried to put Asami and Bolin together to make like, you know, that relationship work, just like a friendship.
Yeah.
And I don't think it necessarily worked super well, but like Asami and Korra works so well. Their pairing together is so great, and I loved that they got so many scenes. And because Korra even said, she's like, I've never had like a girlfriend I can just talk to about stuff before, you know, so it was nice to be able to see them have like a closer bond.
The only thing that I wish is that Asami would get more fight scenes. Because there was a episode early on in this book where you see she's like a really skilled fighter for someone who doesn't have any airbending or any powers.
I mean, because like we had Sokka.
Yeah.
We had Suki.
Right.
And yeah, Asami, I feel like, never gets a lot of good material to work with. She got more of this book, but still.
But she, to me, is like always like the chauffeur. She's every time they have a driving scene, I'm like getting ready for her to be driving.
Or she's flying the air bison.
Yeah.
Or the airship. Yeah.
And I understand that's part of her character, but it's like I love to watch her fight, and I always hate when I know a fight scene's coming, and she's either one, not in the scene, or she'll just be like off to the side.
Yeah.
But besides that, I mean, I was happy they gave her more to work with this season. Oh, I loved getting Varric back.
My God.
Because to me, like, this book, Varric was not in it a lot. He'd be in like 10-second clips, and it like was always my favorite.
He is such a great character.
Yeah. His humor's written so well, and he's just like so enjoyable to have in scenes. So I was really happy when he was back. Obviously, when I found out Zuko,
yes,
it was amazing.
You've been asking about Zuko since before the show started,
and we even got Iroh back for a little bit.
We got Iroh back.
It was nice to get those characters back. I loved Zuko and Korra's talk, kind of about what Aang would have done.
I love that talk so much. Because first you start with Iroh. Mm-hmm. You start with Korra talking to Iroh and him being like, you should talk to Zuko. And it's like this nice continuation of like Iroh to Zuko, Zuko to Aang, Aang Korra. Like, I thought that was such a nice way to tie in Zuko to the story.
Yeah.
I think Zuko's inclusion in this book was the best of the characters we've seen so far.
Yeah, I like that he was there more to be like a guide.
A guide and a support.
Yeah. He wasn't trying to like steal the scenes or anything. And I think that's smart because I think sometimes shows have issues when they bring back, like if it's like a continuation of a show, they bring back characters and they kind of like take over. I don't necessarily like that, but I liked the way they use Zuko's character to be that bridge between like Korra and Aang, since she doesn't have that connection anymore.
Right. She lost her connection to the past avatars. And that, I think, was really interesting in this book, is that she didn't have anyone to rely on. So she has to rely on the people that are in her life and the people who knew Aang. Honestly, like, I think the way they built off of that was done very well this book. Like, I understood why they cut the connection, but I wasn't, like, super thrilled they'd done that.
So I've been talking about a lot of positives. I just want to talk about a little bit of a negative this season, or this book. Because I think even if I love a show, there's always, like, some things.
There's going to be, there's going to be issues.
And this was kind of an issue I had with the first book, too, or maybe it was the second book. Their plan to, like, save all the airbenders and basically falling right into the villain's trap.
Yeah.
And I know that's a trope that shows do because you have to have some sort of conflict.
Yeah.
But I just hate how it's like, these characters aren't just going to give up, like, all the Avatar, or all the airbenders.
Yeah.
So that kind of annoyed me. But honestly, overall, like, I didn't have many negatives this book.
I absolutely love Book 3.
Mm-hmm.
Book 3, I'll make this claim right now. I think Book 3 is the best season of both Avatar and Korra. Is the best individual season between both those shows. I think the story told in the book is so concise and so well done, and the pacing is great, and the fighting's great, and the character interactions, just everything about it, and the ending, we'll get to that. But just the whole package is so well done.
Yeah, they did a lot of the side plots really well. And like you said, I loved how they matched up certain characters.
Book 3 introduced so many great new characters. Mm-hmm. Because Book 2 had new characters, but I didn't really care for a lot of them, other than Varric. I mean, Varric is this phenomenal character. But you get Kai, who's kind of like a little Aang. in ways, and he's this like little misfit, like street rat kid.
Street rat.
Riff raff.
I will.
Buy that.
Okay.
Sorry, just a little added there for you. You get Sue. You get Lynn's sister. You get her whole family. You get Opal. Romantic interest for Bolin. You get all the villains, the 4 members of the Red Lotus. You get Iway.
I didn't mention Sue much, but I loved her character, and I remember when she was first introduced, I kind of thought she might be like a villain. I'm always, a little bit curious when new characters get introduced, what their motive or what their backstory is going to be. But I love that because you got to see more into Lynn's past. And I love watching the metal bending in the show. It's so good. And like you said, the fight scenes were just so good in this season. There was just a lot I really liked about it, to be honest.
All right. Do we want to talk about villains? They're so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
The philosophy, Zahir, is so interesting because there are times when things he's saying, like, it makes sense. Like, I understand the point of view. I understand what he's saying, like, world without leaders where everyone's equal, and without monarchs, because the Earth Queen is not great.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that. Korra sees that. When he talks to her in, like, the Jaibao Grove, he's like, wouldn't it be better if there weren't, if there wasn't an Earth Queen? Because clearly it's not working. But the way they go about it is clearly not right by killing world leaders.
No, but there is some truth to what he's saying.
There's some truth, yeah.
And it's interesting because you can almost understand where he's coming from. Obviously, he's not going about it the right way.
Right.
But even, like, watching, I think Minhwa, the waterbender.
Yeah.
Like, watching her fight was so
Oh, my
awesome.
God. She is, she doesn't have arms.
Like, her arms are water.
Her arms are water. And I agree. She is one of the most dynamic fighters of the show.
When you watch her come out of the water, like, lift up.
Oh, my God. The spider arms.
It's amazing.
When she's in the cave in the finale, when she just has, like, 30 arms coming out. And you get Pali, which is another Sparky Boom Man.
The fire, she shoots, like,
and she can do curve shots.
Yeah.
And then you get Gazan, who's a lava bender.
Yeah.
And you just get this crew of, like, these weirdly talented, unique benders.
Yep. I think what I really appreciate is it's hard to make one compelling villain. I think sometimes shows struggle with that. I think Korra struggled with it last book.
We had Tarlok and Amon, both disappointing in the end, and Unalaq, who sucked the entire season.
But for a show to be able to do 4 different characters, find a way to make them all compelling, and just the way they went about it, like I said, I think it really helped the way they introduced all of them. It was such a good introduction to them, and I just loved every time I knew they were about to start a fight scene. I was so, like, excited because I knew it was just going to look so good.
And I also liked that they were able to tie it back into Avatar and Korra lore, them being a splinter cell of the White Lotus. That they were like, this one guy, Jaibao, I think that was the guy who split, right?
I think so.
So this one dude's just like, we're glorified bodyguards now. Once Aang had saved the world after defeating Ozai, they kind of became like glorified bodyguards, and they weren't like a secret organization like they once were. And because we've learned Korra was like basically kept on a compound for most of her life,
right,
guarded by the White Lotus. And so it was interesting to see that they were going to kidnap her to then teach her to see the world in a different way than what she'd currently seen. And I especially like that Unalaq was a member of the Red Lotus, and that he went against, went against the way it was supposed to go by becoming the dark, avatar and fusing with Vatu. And I thought that was a good way to tie book 2 back into book 3. Make his story at least slightly more interesting than it was.
I think his story and kind of the way they ended it is what I wish they would have done with Amon.
Yeah.
I also, the first time I watched the season through, I didn't even realize that
he was at the air temple, or when he cut his hair. Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but I also didn't realize that the lady who shoots the fire...
Pali.
I didn't realize she died.
You didn't know she died?
It took me like 5 minutes to figure it out.
That was shocking.
I thought what happened was that because they put Sue basically puts the armor around
her head.
And
yeah.
I didn't realize that she basically just like combusted herself.
She blew up her head.
I didn't realize until they were in the cave and
she said that she
Zahir was
sacrificed herself for the cause. Yeah.
And then I went back and rewatched it and I was like, oh my god.
I mean, let's talk about just the brutality of this season. I mean, we've had some brutal stuff. We had the murder-suicide in book 1 and all the stuff with the blood bending. But so this is something that had been discussed a lot, different subsets of bending. People were like, oh, is metal bend, before you found out metal bending, before you found out like metal bending was a thing, blood bending. And people were always like, what would be like a subset of air bending? Like sound.
Sorry, I'm just laughing about you mispronouncing.
I know, I'm sorry. What would be a subset of airbending, like sound bending, or like what could you do? And people had theorized, like, could you bend the air out of someone's lungs? And we've never had an evil airbender before.
No, and can we talk about the fact that he just went Iron Man and flew away?
Yes, but he literally murders the Earth Queen.
I know.
He sucks the air out of her lungs and suffocates her, and we watched that happen. And I remember, because I told you this is the first episode that was online, I remember watching this episode, and I remember just watching it in shock, because I was like, I cannot believe I just watched this. And then you continue on, you get Poli's head blowing up, you get Minghua electrocuted, and then buried by Gazan, who was like, I'm not going back to prison, I'm going to kill myself before
he tries to do another murder-suicide.
Yes. Another murder-suicide.
With
Baloo, the bear.
With Bolin and Mako.
Bolin and Mako, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, and then, but yeah, it's very brutal, and I love it.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't expect it.
Yeah.
Because of the show, because it's more directed for like children or teenagers, but it's cool to see.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit of a psychopath.
No, I think it's great. I loved it. I love seeing all that. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that we go back to Ba Sing Se. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen Ba Sing Se since Avatar, and it looks very different. Dai Li is still awful and gross, and hate them. They still look really cool though. They got their cool stone gloves. I think that was really interesting to see. And did you also hear the note about how the rumor that the Earth Queen ate Bosco?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, terrifying.
And then I thought about Bosco cheese sticks.
Of course, Bosco's bread stuffed cheese sticks.
But yeah, like, I loved Ba Sing Se in Avatar, and it's interesting to see how much it's changed since then. Mm-hmm. And I kind of loved when the Earth Queen was murdered, how they kind of just like freed, and they were like, that's why part of me like almost sympathizes with those villains.
Yeah.
Because they essentially were freeing people who were under rule of like a tyrant.
What do you think the implications are going to be of that going into book 4? Do you think that's going to have some relevance to the plot?
I mean, I think it's definitely could be a conflict because, yeah, you freed a bunch of people, but you also now have a city that's just basically people doing whatever they want.
It's just lawless because there's no ruler.
There's no clear leadership now. Mm-hmm. So I think there definitely could be some issues from that. We can start with favorite line, I guess.
Sure.
I had a really hard time picking a line.
I have 3 things written down here. I had a really hard time as well.
Yeah. I think Zahir, like, I had probably 3 or 4 lines from him.
I did as well.
I also had a line from Tenzin, because Tenzin always got that
I had
wisdom.
a line from Tenzin as well.
But the one I chose to go with, the one that kind of really hit me, was Zahir. And he says, when you base your expectations only on what you see, you blind yourself to the possibilities of a new reality.
It's the first thing I have written in my favorite quotes.
I remember when I heard that, I literally went back and rewatched it. Because I was like, that's such... And he had a couple lines that really, like...
Let go of your earthly tether, enter the void, empty and become wind.
Yeah.
It's just... The way he worded things was so interesting and thought-provoking.
And he had a lot of, you could tell, like, philosophy behind it.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting because he was a non-bender who was supposed to be Korra's airbending teacher. So clearly he studied and was well aware of airbending culture.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting that he then became an airbender with all this knowledge he was able to use to his advantage.
So favorite fight.
This was so hard for me.
I had like 4 or 5 listed.
It was so hard.
My favorite one was Tenzin and Zahir at the air temple.
That was also my favorite as well.
That I loved it because you get to see just how powerful Tenzin actually is.
I love it because up until that point, Zahir was bodying everybody. Then Tenzin is an airbending master, and you can see that. And I love it.
Yeah, it's the first time he's actually had a struggle. Zahir has. And I love just to see Tenzin. It's so interesting to see how different Tenzin's fighting is from Ain's.
Yes.
Where it's so much more aggressive.
Right.
It's
It's also interesting to see how different Tenzin's is from Zahir.
Right.
Because Zahir's very boxy. Like, he's like boxing air, whereas, Tenzin is aggressive, but still so much flowier.
And I felt like this was the first time when you really understood, Zahir just has picked up airbending because he looked like such an amateur compared to Tenzin.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, the fight doesn't end so well for Tenzin.
Tenzin was taking on 4 people at once. And he was, succeeding for a little bit there.
But just to see his power, it was so cool to see.
It was such a spectacle. I don't think I ever expected to see an airbender versus airbender fight in the show. And the fact that we got that was so cool to see.
Yeah. So favorite episode, I had a really hard time. I had 2 that I was picking between. Mm-hmm. The one I actually liked the most was the one right before that.
The Ultimatum.
The Ultimatum.
That's my favorite as well.
Yeah. The reason is because, first off, you get to see Iroh.
You start this episode with Korra facing this moral dilemma. Should she be sacrificing herself for the greater good?
You're the greatest good
I am the greatest good you're ever gonna get. Which I think is really interesting because Korra has never had to face a problem like this. Normally she's able to tackle her problems with her fighting and her bending and her headstrong will, but this time it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's her versus the entirety of the Air Nation, and that's such a big deal and a huge thing that she's morally able to decide that they're more important than she is.
Yeah. So I love that. Also, it's that scene between Zuko and Korra that I love.
And Zuko finding out Iroh's in the spirit world.
Yeah.
Which I love.
The thing I love the most is the last 10 minutes. I would say it's maybe one of the best 10-minute segments I've ever seen in a TV show.
The tension and the build-up is so well done.
That's when you see, Tenzin and Zahir fighting. There's also Bumi and Kaya are fighting. Yeah. All the conflicts that's going on, all the cuts were done so cleanly.
The destruction of the Northern Air Temple. Oh, that's the next episode. Sorry, just kidding. That was the next,
it is being destroyed.
It leads into that, yes.
But just, I think that last 10 minutes really sold it for me, but it was just such a well done episode as a complete 20-minute segment.
Yeah, I picked it. I knew going into that this was going to be my favorite episode. There were a few other ones that I think are really well done. I think the episode where they try to kidnap Korra in the Metal Clan, I think that episode's really well done. But yeah, definitely I would say the Ultimatum it's a great episode to lead into the finale because it sets the stakes.
I think the last 3 episodes
well done.
They were so good. And the whole season was good, but those last 3 together are just great. Such a good segment. Do you have anything else on that, or you want to go to scene?
Do we want to go to scene?
Yeah. So I think my favorite, though, just because I got chills, was Jinora
getting your tattoos.
Yeah. Because I didn't. I knew she was you knew she was going to become an air master, but when she pulls the hood off, and you see her with the shaved head and the tattoos and the music that's playing, and you see Korra getting emotional.
I have a lot to say about this finale and this scene.
The thing I loved about it was right before Tenzin's kind of giving a speech, and it's basically how Korra is not in a position to be able to defend everyone. She's in a wheelchair, everything like that. And before that scene, I think it's the president of Republic City.
Yes.
He's kind of like, who's going to protect us now?
Right.
And Tenzin kind of is like, the airbenders are going to be nomads again and kind of wander and help whoever needs help.
Right.
But seeing a character like Jinora, who I never expected to become a big part of the show, and then getting her moment, and it's just cool to see. Like, I just think in general it's cool to see, like, a female character, especially because she's not that old.
Right, she's the same age as Aang when he got his tattoos.
And just seeing that there's hope for the future of the Air Kingdom and Tenzin.
Air Kingdom.
No, not Air Kingdom.
Air Nation.
Air Nation.
Air Kingdom.
I was thinking Earth Kingdom.
Yeah.
Just seeing Tenzin's face, knowing that there's hope. And, I don't know, just that whole scene I think was done so well.
And she looks so much like Aang in that scene. So I love the finale because starting from when Asami's with Korra, because you get the pan down shot and you see that she's in a wheelchair and it's been 2 weeks and she's we kind of didn't talk about the fact that she was poisoned. She was poisoned and suffering mental distress from basically getting suffocated by Zahir and basically almost dying and having this poison in her that like wrecked her body, and she's in a wheelchair. And Korra's always been this strong character that relies on her strength, and like her skills.
Yeah.
And to see her beaten and broken like that. And I wanted to touch on 2 things you talked about. So you talked about how Tenzin gives this speech about how the air nomads are going to act as the protectors of the world while Korra is in recovery. And Tenzin is trying to be comforting and supportive, and to come across like, we got you covered while you recover, we're here for you. And he's saying it in a way that's comforting, but I think Korra, that breaks her. I think hearing that she's not needed when she's always talked about how being the Avatar is all she's ever wanted to be, and being the Avatar is her identity, and the fact that it's basically like, we don't need you right now, is like, tips her over the edge. And the music that plays during that scene is maybe my favorite track in the entirety of The Legend of Korra, other than before that scene that played during the flashback, Amon's flashback. It's called Service and Sacrifice, if that's not, relevant to that. But the way the music builds as, you reveal Jinora getting her tattoos and her and Tenzin sharing a moment, and then you just end with Korra crying.
Yeah.
And, like, that breaks me every single time. I've never watched that scene and not cried, and I'm literally tearing up right now while I'm talking about it because it's such a powerful moment, and it's so sad. We end the season with a broken Korra.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you go from Korra being so defeated to Jinora, like, probably the best moment of her life.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see that, again, there's, like, that dynamic.
The parallels, like, the parallel between those two,
And I didn't even mention, I loved that Asami and Korra scene, because when you think about it, they started out kind of as enemies.
Yeah, they both were in a love triangle with the same guy.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see that bond, because neither of them probably really had that many girlfriends. But I love that relationship. I love that they grew on that. And it's so interesting, like I said, to see that dynamic between the two of them.
Right.
So, top 3 characters?
Top 3 characters, and then I got a few just quick questions about things for book 4. I had such a hard time. So I had 2 characters for sure that I wanted, but my third one, I had 6 characters that were vying for 3rd place.
I agree. So my third character, I went with Zahir.
My 3rd character, I went with Tenzin.
Okay. I just think Zahir, such a compelling villain. We talked about how many lines he had that I loved, and I was choosing between him, and it was Asami and Lin and Sue and Jinora.
You literally, here are the characters I had vying for 3rd place. Asami, Mako, Lin, Sue, Jinora. Yeah.
I think that's a testament to how good they wrote the characters this season.
I had such a hard time picking.
But to me, Zahir was such a compelling villain. I loved all his scenes he was in. And I don't usually put a villain as one of my favorite characters, but I think he just kind of stole every scene he was in.
I put Tenzin as number 3 because I think there are two characters that I liked more this season, just their story and the way their growth went. But I loved seeing his development throughout the season because as much as this was Korra's story, this was also Tenzin's because it's his legacy and him carrying on Aang's legacy by teaching these new airbenders and watching the struggle of trying to get people to join. I loved that, they're going around the Earth Kingdom and nobody wants to join.
Yeah.
And then they get to Ba Sing Se and they save the air, army, and he's like, it's up to you to choose, and they all choose to join him, and he's like tearing up, and I loved seeing the emotion out of Tenzin and the growth and maturity and his relationship with Boomy. We didn't even talk about Boomy gets airbending.
We could talk about this show for like 3
I know we
hours.
could talk about that, but I thought that was I loved that he got airbending because I felt like it gave him a more he had a closer connection with his father. Yeah.
I'll just say that I put Tenzin as number 2.
I put Zahir as number 2.
Yeah. I'm not really going to talk more about Tenzin because you basically touched on everything.
I was going to say Zahir is the same thing. He's the most compelling villain we've seen so far.
But I agree with everything you said about Tenzin.
And I'm just going to guess we have the same number 1, Korra.
Korra.
Yeah.
To me, because the first book I really struggled with Korra.
I did as well.
And she had a lot of growth, but this was the first book for me as a complete book collection where I just enjoyed her the whole time.
I think the culmination of the first 2 books led to book 3 Korra. I think we needed to have arrogant, assholey Korra to get to this Korra.
But I wonder if, I don't know why I feel like she was arrogant, because, I don't know. I wonder if she was a male character, if I would have felt the same way.
Yeah, I don't. It could be bias. Here's the way I see it. She grew up in a compound. She didn't have any normal relationships or experiences in the real world, and especially going to a city, and she was not used to the way things were done. So she comes across as very, I love that she's confident. I think it's great that she's confident, but she definitely has an air of superiority, at least in book 1 early on.
It's interesting though, because I think sometimes confidence in women is
it's seen as brashness and
is viewed so much than a guy who's confident. And I think with my whole thing is, I agree with you. I think the first book she really was. She had a lot of arrogance. But I also think that maybe part of me is just,
it could be an unconscious bias.
And there's so many TV shows and movies that portray these confident women. They have to be these horrible people.
Yeah, I know.
Or they have to be seen as just annoying or just rude or whatever. This whole book and at the end, seeing her so defeated, and you just got so much dynamic with her character. She had so much conflict with other main characters. I just loved it this season.
I think her growth and her development this season was so well done because she's still confident and she still can be cocky, but she knows how to communicate with people, and she knows for instance her and the Earth Queen, she's still, it's her, you can see her in it, but she's more diplomatic, than for instance her and Tarlock. Versus her and the Earth Queen. Some of that's still there, but she's able to approach it in a way that's not her beating the shit out, going to his office to intimidate him.
Right.
Kind of deal. Oppress and intimidate, when they had the extreme meats conversation.
I think we should probably move into thoughts on
Yes,
next.
and I was going to, my first one is, where do we go with Korra in book 4?
It depends on the time jump.
Okay.
I would imagine what they're probably going to do is a little bit of a time jump, but I can't imagine that Korra will be 100% back to herself. They ended the last book with you feeling like that, where she's at mentally and where she's at physically, it's going to carry on into the next book. I would hope it would, at least, because you'll get to see a different side of her, something she hasn't had to deal with before. So I would imagine maybe they'll do a little bit of a time jump, but I think she'll still be in kind of a vulnerable place.
Right.
Just one thing I wanted to mention, because I didn't notice it the first time I watched this book 3, but I noticed it in my rewatch.
Yes. I think I know what you're going to say.
Okay, I think there's a character that's going to be introduced next book.
Are you talking about Kuvira?
Yeah. So I didn't even notice the first time I watched it. They never have a character say their name unless they're going to become some sort of important character.
Right.
She was one of the captains in the Metal Tribe?
Yes, she's one of the members of Lynn's guard, and she shows up a lot in book 3. I'm sure you noticed in your rewatch. She's one of the dancers.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. She appears in several episodes. You see her in the newspaper, like a picture of her.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't notice it on the first watch through.
Right. And I noticed, and I'm imagining she'll become more of a main character. She introduced herself to Korra's dad.
Yes, and said, "You can call me Kuvira,"
Yeah.
and there was a weird zoom in on her.
Yeah. I also think the Red Lotus is going to continue to be a source of conflict.
Okay.
The way Zahir sort of ended, he said, I forgot what he said, but he basically insinuated that like a revolution has begun or something like that. Also at the end, they mention the Red Lotus again.
Right.
I can't imagine that will just disappear. But it'll be interesting to see how the airbenders come into play now that we have a whole like army of airbenders.
Right.
I'd be curious to see like if a lot of the characters, like if Sue will stick around, if you'll get to keep those characters. I don't know, and I don't even really have an idea of what kind of villain we'll get.
I was just going to ask you what
Yeah.
you thought about what type of villain do you think we're going to see next season?
I don't know, because it's like we've had a group of villains, we've had individual villains. I don't know if it will be more of a, like the Red Lotus as a whole, because there's like an organization, so maybe it will be kind of more of a how do I want to say this? Like a villain you don't necessarily know how to fight because you don't really know the extent of it.
Right.
But I'm not really sure. I don't even know what kind of villain we'll have. I really don't have an idea of where they'll be going to. I'm not really sure. Like you said, there might be more issues with Bassi and Say. But besides that, I don't really know.
Okay. Do you expect all of the characters from like book 3 to be relevant in book 4? Do you think there's going to be new characters? Do you think there's going to be old characters returning? Are some people going to have less importance than other people? I just am curious what your thoughts on that are.
I think that in order to introduce new characters, they're going to have to put some of the characters from last season on the back burner. I would think maybe Lynn, either Mako or Bolin, one of the two of them.
Okay.
I was impressed with how well they were able to distribute out characters getting moments this last book.
I agree.
But like I said, in order to introduce new characters, some of those other characters have to kind of get put on the back burner. I would hope that Asami is going to get at least as much or more of a role, and I think the way they ended it with her and Korra getting kind of more of a relationship there, I imagine that would be built upon. I do kind of...
So you told me in this book that you had remembered something.
So I've seen online, like on Twitter, or people I follow, mention Kasami?
Korrasami. Yes.
So I don't know if maybe they become an actual sort of relationship, but also it was Nickelodeon. I don't know if they're allowed to, or if they would have actually shown like a female-female relationship. But I have heard stuff about that. So it could just be more of like a
shipping.
Yeah. People see scenes together and they kind of want them together. I'm not really sure. But I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. I imagine some of the characters are going to have to kind of get less of a storyline, because I imagine there will be new characters introduced who are going to kind of get more time. But I don't really know.
So you mentioned that you would imagine that Kuvira is going to be a character in book 4.
Yeah.
What kind of role do you see her playing?
See, I don't know, because part of me was like, maybe she could end up becoming more of a villain, because I don't really know anything about her besides just seeing her in scenes.
With the Metal Clan.
Yeah. But also part of me is like maybe she'll become more of like an ally and just become a more important role because she is a higher up in the Metal Clan. I don't know if maybe her getting more time will take away from like Lynn, because they're comparable in their fighting and
Right.
similar, I guess, stories. But I'm not really sure. I also don't have a guess for the title.
How do you think the show's going to end?
I don't know.
Okay.
I literally have no idea.
Okay.
My ideal ending would either be, like I said, like seeing them all in the spirit world just hanging out,
Okay.
or just like Korra and like maybe if she ends up with Asami, them just like piecing out into the sunset together.
Okay.
That's it.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
We would like to thank Joseph McDade for our intro music. He provides free music available for all kinds of creative use. The song that we used is called Sunrise Expedition, and you can find it and his other music on his website, josephmcdade.com. If you would like to reach us, you can email us at r3podcasts@gmail.com. That's R, the number 3, podcasts@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Instagram by searching Research Rank Repeat.